Hi everyone, and welcome to another edition of Not Your Granny's Opera Podcast. Today is a really cool episode because I have my first actual interview. I will be interviewing Cecilia Damström, who's a Finnish composer, and Mathew Habib, who's a Spieltenor with an opera company in Germany. Now let's start out with our shout out for the week. They're called Heartbeat Opera, and they're basically another version of opera music, but they have different focuses, I think, a little bit in terms of what kinds of shows they're going to do. But essentially, it's the same thing. They're adapting shows and shortening them, putting them in English, non-traditional venues, all that great stuff, which you all know that I love. They're in New York City, and so far they've done Lucia, Dido, and Butterfly. Most recently this season they did Giovanni and Fidelio. They've done a drag show. And so it looks like a really, really cool thing. I'll put a link to their website in the comments. For Colleen's Corner, I want to use this segment to talk about the upcoming production of La Belle Hélène. Actually, I don't really know. I kind of feel like we should just call it the Real Housewives of Sparta. But then again, that's kind of misleading too, because they're like, that's an opera? Because we're using Offenbach's music, I don't know. I haven't really figured that out 100%, but either way, it's the music and basic storyline of La Belle Hélène, which is a farce on the elopement between Paris and Helen of Troy in Greek mythology. In our version, we have Helen. So the women are Helen, Parthenais, and Leona. So we have Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, Parthenais, who is the quasi-courtesan. So basically, the housewives are Leona, Parthenais, and Hélène. Of course, Hélène at the beginning of the show, she's married to Menelaus. We do find out that Parthenais, her husband had a little bit of a problem, and he ends up getting killed by a mob. And so now she's having to be essentially an escort in order to make a living and have all the riches and stuff like that she had with her husband, because her husband was dealing drugs, and so he got kind of caught up in that. Now, Leona, she's a fitness guru, and she's all about that whole healthy lifestyle thing. And so we also have, like I mentioned, Menelaus, Helen's husband. He's in this show. Paris, of course. We have Agamemnon, the King of Kings. But the thing is with Agamemnon, he's not the King of Kings in our show. He's the King of Queens, because he's a drag queen. And then the last person, of course, is Kalkos. Kalkos in the original show is kind of like this high priest character, but he's going to be Andy Kalkos, like Andy Cohen. So essentially our production takes place on the reunion episode, and so we're just reliving what happened in season, I can't remember. I know I did some Greek number. It's like season XXYI or whatever of the Real Housewives of Sparta. Basic storyline is we start out at the beginning of the reunion episode, and so it's just Kalkos and the women talking, and just kind of reliving what happened, and some of the things that are completely made up, like the whole drug dealer husband of Parthenais that gets killed, and all this stuff. Oh, actually, no, I forgot. Leona is married to Achilles. And so we bring in this whole like Achilles heel joke in there. And so, yeah. So then we fast forward to the actual recap of everything, and you got Helen, who's really frustrated at Menelaus because he's always gone and doesn't treat her well, and all she wants is to be loved, right? Even though, yes, she is the most beautiful woman in the world, she's also a human who has needs, and she's not unlike many of the people that you find on Real Housewives. She's not a princess. Like, she really is a good person. She just happens to also be the most beautiful woman in the world. eventually Kalkos comes in and they talk, and Kalkos is like, look, you can't be this sad all the time. Like, this isn't good. You know what though? I talked to Partanis and Leona, and they're gonna come and help you. So they come in and they do this trio that's a lot of fun, where Partanis is trying to basically tell her that she's gotta, not be so stingy when it comes to flirting and all this stuff. And then Leona is trying to help her get in shape by working out and giving her moves. And of course, the Kalkos is in on this. And towards the end, when Hélène has her verse, she tries to rope Kalkos into this whole fun little number. And there's like potentially dancing. I mean, I don't know. I'm not directing it. I'm in New York. Sammy's going to be directing it. And she's going to do a great job. But so she may end up choosing something else, and then that's totally fine. But I was thinking we have like the whole conga line at the end, because they have these like nonsense Greek words that I don't think they actually mean anything. I think it was just something that Offenbach made up, and it's like sing la la, oi kefale, oh la la, sing la la, and it just kind of goes back and forth. And you could totally, when I did the production, they had a conga line like. And since it was a full show, you had like 20 people doing a conga line all over stage. It was hilarious. But so yeah, then eventually they all leave except for Kalkos, and Paris comes in and he's like, hey, he clearly looks like he's on a mission. And Kalkos talks to him, and Paris tells him who he is and what he's there for. Then Kalkos is like, look, you're Priam's son, man. Like, you can't get beautiful women in Troy or Athens or wherever you go. And he's like, no, I was promised that I would have the most beautiful woman in the world. And let me tell you the story behind it. So then he does this whole aria about it. And then because of that, Kalkos then goes to help him have this whole plan come to fruition. Now, I'm not going to spoil it, but basically he goes incognito, and there's this duel of, like a trivia battle, essentially, between him and when eventually Menelaus and Agamemnon come back from war. And, of course, Paris wins, and then he eventually reveals who he is, and throughout this whole process, the women are infatuated with him. And then it all ends, of course, with Hélène wanting to kind of get some more time with Paris, but she doesn't really know how to. So Kalkos says that the gods have decreed that Menelaus should go to the island of Crete. So he goes off, and they sing this whole number at the end, and that's the end of Act 1. Beginning of Act 2, it's... I should mention this. So as part of the deal in this whole trivia battle is Paris, if he wins, then he gets one night with Hélène. Without Menelaus, he can't do anything, right? But if he loses, then he's going to be Menelaus' servant for the rest of his life. Okay, so fast forward to Act 2. That night with Hélène has happened, and Menelaus is still in Crete at this point. And she's just basically lamenting why the gods just won't let her be happy. Like, they can't... She's just is really torn in how her life has come around. She sees Paris. And so they have this really great duet where they confess their love to each other. And they basically say, look, you're not happy. Paris says, look, you're not happy. I want to make you happy. Let's run off together. And because there has to be drama, you see where this is going. Guess who shows up? Knock, knock, knock. It's Menelaus. And so now they got to kind of cover this up. And he starts making fun of Paris. And Paris, of course, has to comment about that. And so then they have this whole argument and stuff like that. And the rest of the characters come on stage to witness all of it after being at a party. They tell Paris that he's got to leave. And then at the end of that huge ensemble number, we have Kalkos, Agamemnon, and Menelaus. And they're talking, and they're like, I just don't know what to do, Menelaus says. And Menelaus is like, I just feel like dying, and Agamemnon's like, you know what, that's not a bad idea. You should just kill yourself. Like, let's just end this and get it over with. So they have this whole trio that's a lot of fun, where Menelaus actually fakes dying, and Calchas and Agamemnon are like, wow, that was quick. And then he's of course comes back to life, and then after that is one of my favorite moments in the whole show, which is Paris's last aria. So he comes out. There's this short little dialogue where all the characters come out on stage, and Paris is the Grand Augure, or the great high priest, and he sings this wacky aria that's so fun. It has, because of how it's written, it's actually yodeling, so it's like it's a riot. It's so good. And then eventually Helen comes out. Paris finds a way to essentially manipulate the situation and prove to Menelaus that if he really cares about Helen, then he'll let her go, and if it's really meant to be, then she'll come back to him after Paris is done. Even though I don't want the impression to be that Paris is one of those guys that just is a hit it and quit it and he's, gone. Like, he actually does love Helen, but, if it doesn't work out for her, then she can always go back to Menelaus. And so, yeah. And then they all live happily ever after, because Paris and Helen go off to wherever they're going off to, and everyone else leaves, and Menelaus realizes that it's all in the gods' hands. And so it's a really fun show because there's a lot of things for everybody. I was balancing three things. I was balancing, let's be true to Offenbach and his music and the basic storyline of what happened there. Let's be true to Greek mythology. Like, I was looking up different Greek mythological characters and gods and all this stuff to help add in, references and people. Like, for example, there's some references in that very first very first dialogue when Andy, Calchas, and the women are talking about the last season, where basically Partanis is visited by a bunch of people that are the symbol of death in Greek mythology. And that's how she finds out about her husband, And then the third thing was, of course, the whole point of the show, which is Real Housewives flavor. So I was looking up famous quotes and just kind of asking my friends, and also watching a fair amount because my girlfriend loves watching it. Just kind of the prototypes, the tropes and archetypes of the characters in that show. And so when I combined all these different things, it was just a lot of fun writing it, because I feel I have a pretty creative mind, but when I have these, it's not just me figuring out a character. Like, I have actual people to base them off of. Like the princess type, the helicopter mom type, the in our show, the fitness person, that are in these different shows. It's a lot of fun to put these together. And so for those of you who are in Seattle, or if it comes to a town near you, I hope you really check it out, because, obviously I'm biased and I'm shamelessly self-promoting my own stuff. I totally get that, and I own that. However, I think it's going to be a really fun show, and I'm really excited to see what the singers and Sammy do with it in Seattle. I hope it goes other places as well, because it's a really fun concept and all that. Welcome to the podcast. This, of course, is the last segment in this week's episode, and today we have... tell me if I'm saying your name wrong, but Cecilia Damström, great, and Mathew Habib. So before I get into the questions, why don't you both give the listeners a little bit of your background and what you're doing?
Let's go. So I'm Cecilia Damström from Finland. I have studied composition Sweden, and I work full time as a composer, composing music for like orchestras and musicians, solo pieces, chamber music for festivals, and I've written one chamber opera and an opera for children so far.
Great.
My name is Mathew Habib, and I'm from Orlando, Florida. A couple years ago, I moved to Germany to take a position with a theater, and after one season, I moved to a different theater, and so now I am full-time in Würzburg, Germany with Mein Franken Theater, and I am part of their ensemble as the Spiel tenor for their operas.
All right, very cool. Cecilia, you've said a composer's job is to help the audience think and feel things. How do you try to achieve that in your compositions?
Yeah, well, that's at least my personal mission with my music. So I want to tell stories with my music. And I think the important part about a story is also how it makes you feel. And the emotions make us think about things. So emotion and thinking, combining them, I make it in music. For example, which story I tell is important. For example, I've now been writing piano quints. I have a biology of 3 piano quintets I'm writing. I've written 2 so far. The first one was about the first Finnish feminist and writer Minna Kant. And the second one is that I wrote this year is about Aino Sibelius. She was the wife of Sibelius. And I'm telling their life through emotions and what I think they must have felt. For example, when Jean Sibelius was quite badly alcoholized and never came home, and his wife would call him and ask, "When are you thinking of coming home after 3 days of drinking?" He said, "I'm not a fortune teller, I'm a composer." So so these sort of emotions that I think she must have felt, I try to express in my music, and at this, in the same time, also tell the story of women, which is usually not very much told in history. There's history books that are mainly about white men.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you grew up in a multicultural family, which of course is an asset to anybody. As we try to be more inclusive in our art form, both in who gets to perform and the kinds of stories that we're telling, how can we better reach out to those whom classical music and specifically opera tends to not be a part of their lives?
I think like you have to start like early including people. So for example in Finland, like children opera is a quite big scene here. So we had last year, I know that there were at least 10 different productions of children operas, and some of them even are touring the country, so that they have a set of 3 singers and 1 accordionist or pianist touring with them. And perform in small towns of 10,000 people or 4,000 people. They set up the opera in the morning and then play 2 or 3 shows, and then they can travel on to another city. So even like regions which maybe otherwise have a hard time to get a lot of culture will get exposed to like and included. And I think it's important that you feel included, that this is things that you experience as a child already that touch me, that are important for me, that I'm written for me or composed for me, and tell stories that are for me, exclusively for me as a person. And when you have this positive experience already as a child, I think it's much easier you feel much more included in the world of opera.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I don't know if Matt told you much about what I've done, but a lot of my solo stuff has actually been with children's operas and going to elementary schools and rural communities, and basically being the gateway drug for these kids when it comes to classical music, and seeing their eyes light up. You know, a lot of educators and a lot of people in the U.S. really don't value opera until they actually see it live, and especially when they see their kids just eat it up.
You know, as a kid, I was very fortunate where my father would take me to baseball games, but he would also take me to shows.
Mm-hmm.
I could see myself in both scenarios as a kid, like, oh, I love playing baseball, or, oh, I could also be on a stage. I really enjoyed that too. So I think it's, if the parents aren't going to be able to get their kids to a show, then it'd be cool for the universities or for a private company or for the state to be able to provide just a little bit of knowledge of that it's possible and you also can do it.
Mm-hmm.
And in Finland, we have, for example, this what we call school opera, so which is run by the National Opera. That they have this set of like 3 singers, 2 musicians at tour, and then there's like a children choir part, which is quite easy. It's our new pieces that are composed for this. And then they tour like the different schools in the country, and every school that wants to be part of it, like practices a choir part. They can either sing in one voice or 3 voices, depending on how good the choir is. Yeah. But to be actually part of an opera yourself when you're like 9 or 10 or 11, it's a very big experience, which again includes you very much into this community, that you feel like, wow, I could be part of an opera.
As an accomplished female composer, what advice do you have for women who are trying to make it? Because it seems that it's obviously traditionally been dominated by men. That is starting to change. But what do you think are maybe a couple things that you would say to a young composer, say just starting in their undergrad or something like that?
Well, yeah, you have to work hard with music always, and well, some say there's so much like maybe invisible sexism. So I've sometimes experienced maybe as a woman you have to work harder for getting the same as an average. Put off by it. If you're really prepared to work hard, you will reach your goals, and believe in yourself. That's the most important. And yeah, accept the work you think you deserve. So don't.
Yeah, I think the believing in yourself part, as I'm sure all 3 of us know, is sometimes the hardest part, especially when you're either not getting opportunities or you think you're more deserving of better opportunities, even though you may or may not be. But I think that's really true. It's really important to just take the work as it comes, because you learn so many things through doing that, and finding ways to create opportunities for yourself.
I think that we're not deserving, like we would deserve better, but then we have to keep working until we get that what we think we deserve. Not give up and say like, oh, I tried it for a while and it didn't work, but just keep on working until we get there where we want to be.
Yeah, completely agree. I was working, when I lived in Seattle, I worked at Seattle Opera, and one of the first shows I did, there's the guy who's the lead baritone in the show. Actually, yeah, the lead. He was doing an interview shortly after he did the show with me, and he's now gone on to win a bunch of awards, including the Tucker Award and stuff like that. And one of the things he said in this interview that is really true about what you're saying is you have to keep in mind that for a lot of people, this career is a slow burn. Like, most people don't just come out of college and they're singing all over the world. Like, that's really not usually what happens. It's not unheard of, but it usually isn't. It just takes a lot of time refining your skills, and sometimes that's a few years, sometimes that's decades, and then boom, you're going all over the place. All right, Matt, you've been a soloist in both the US and Europe. What are some of the main differences between the 2 places in terms of engaging new audiences and introducing them to the art form? I'm sure it's a little bit easier in Europe since it kind of originated there. But anyway, and then what are some of the pitfalls that companies often fall into that can potentially be avoided?
That's a really good question. I think the biggest difference, which is usually the case, is economics. Within almost all of the opera is privately funded and privately organized and privately produced. Whereas in Europe, it's almost exclusively state-funded and taxpayer-funded. And so what that means to a performer is in the States, you're going to put up productions much quicker, in about really half the time. In my experiences in the States, you have about 21 days to from the first rehearsal to the first premiere of your show. And you usually have 6 weeks, at least within the German system and the Austrian and Switzerland system. It's about a 6-week rolling plan where every 6 weeks they're coming out with the next show. And so you get a lot more time, but it also gives the time for the costume designers and the stage builders and makeup artists to do all of their design work with the director. Mm-hmm. So it seems to make sense with regards to how much work really has to be done, and then you have to bring in an orchestra. Yeah. Which is a whole nother animal when you're trying to put a show together. With engaging the audience, it's much easier in Europe for a good and a bad reason. You're kind of the only show in town.
Oh, okay.
So when people want to see theater, it's usually a regional or state-run theater that is available. Now, don't get me wrong, we do have private theaters in Germany, but there have been a few controversies lately, even where I'm at, where there's privately run theaters saying, hey, the state theater, you're making this too affordable.
Oh my goodness.
Making this too affordable, and we cannot compete with these prices to put up our shows. And it's expensive to do theater. And so we, as a theater, are engaging with those private theaters and trying to work with them. We really are trying to find a balance. But at the same time, you want people to come to your shows. And when you live in a city that has 40,000 students and you can offer them €5 tickets, why not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When you can give them a ballet and give them a symphony and give them an opera all in the same week, and they're spending €10, at least the European system feels that that's a huge benefit to society and to that individual who is studying, to make them a well-rounded person as they enter into society. In the States, like you said before, you get to travel around, and as long as there's somebody that can produce it, I almost find that system better because where the student is comfortable, you're at their school.
Yeah.
And so they are completely comfortable with the whole surrounding. You're bringing something to them so they get out of class for a little bit. Yeah. It's almost like a treat. It's a little, and they're like, wow, this is now something fun. And maybe I didn't choose to do this today, but I came to school and, we're skipping half of our English lesson and we get to go see this really cool opera and this really nice production. And I think that almost leaves a better impression, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure I answered the question, but I think I did.
Well, the second half of it was more like, are there any general pitfalls that companies can get into that could potentially be avoided? Like, for example, I feel one example that I always bring up is, you can have a brand new production of something. It's all flashy and all these things. But one of the big barriers for people in the US, at least, because we're not as multilingual as they are in Europe, especially in the singing languages, is that the problem is it's still not in English. So it's like putting a new paint job on your beater car and expecting everyone to think it's this new amazing car. No, it looks better, but it's not. It still has a hot mess under the hood. So that
on many levels, I think when something is in your mother tongue, it's infinitely more accessible. Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, you also want to, at some point, show people that there's more to this, and like the other languages has the poetry that's worthwhile. And I can give you an example. I just took a trip to Dublin, Ireland, and really, just by chance, I was walking by a park, and I heard somebody doing a sound check. And the sound check was for Hansel and Gretel by Engelbert Humperdinck. And I said, what is going on here? And so because of this production being in English, the Irish company came out and just did the whole thing in English. But one of the people of the show is usually the narrator. And with this company is when they were doing a show that was not in English, they entered a narrator because they were doing an hour-long show, and they said, okay, so we're going to tell you what's happening at the beginning, and then they would make it really fun and entertaining to say, okay, now the narrator comes in and says, here's what just happened, or here's what's coming up. And so the audience was actually a little disappointed that they didn't have a narrator for that show because it was they really went, oh. I mean,
Yeah.
I was so surprised and shocked, and it was such a wonderful experience to see this opera in the park, and it wasn't just elderly people coming out. You had moms and families with their children in the middle of the day on a Thursday coming to this to enjoy a 45-minute to an hour-long opera, and it did not matter what language because the company made it accessible.
So now, Matt, you mentioned earlier that you're the spiel tenor at or at the opera house that you work at, which is a very specialized voice type. Why don't you just quickly explain what that means to the audience, and then the question I have for you is, because that is a very specific voice type, there is a chance, and it's with any voice type that's really specific like that, that you kind of do the same kinds of roles and shows. So, how do you keep your artistic soul alive when you're kind of doing the same thing in every single show?
Yeah, so for the audience, a Spieltenor, Spiel in German means play. So I'm the playful playing tenor, which is more of an acting role or a character role. I do sing quite a lot. It can be in ensemble, solos, duets, trios, or with the chorus. So be it. It really just depends on the show. And within the German system, they hire singers, the soloists. There's two ways to be a soloist: is you can be full time, part of the ensemble, and what that means is you have like a normal job. You have a normal monthly pay, normal monthly insurance. It's like you work as an accountant, but instead of going to the accounting firm, you go to the shops every day. And the other way is if you can be hired as a guest, and that's where you would go from theater to theater, never being at one theater for a full season, maybe half a season at one theater and a quarter of a season with others. And so I'm part of the ensemble, and so within this ensemble, when they hire the soloists, they need people to do every part of the show. And so you need your leading male tenor, who's usually the love interest, and you need your dramatic soprano, and you need a coloratura, and you need a mezzo soprano. Because when you put on for us, we do about 7 operas a season, usually. They have to plug us in to every show. So, or at least 5-ish of the shows, so that they get their money's worth out of us.
Yeah.
They're not paying us just to sit around. So I got very lucky, and I found this very specific niche of Spieltenor, which is the sidekick. So what I always tell people as the joke is, the really good-looking guy who's always going for the girl, I stand next to that guy.
Yeah.
And usually I'm causing problems, whether it's a heated problem or I'm an evil character. When I'm on the stage, it's usually something bad or funny is going to happen that's going to make the love interest not get what he wants, or the woman, a love interest, not get what she wants in that exact moment, and make it a little bit more complicated as the story continues. For the second part is, I'm actually very lucky. I get to do many different characters. So I think I'm actually one of the lucky few people, because for example, next season, in one of the shows, I'm playing, Parpignol and Bohème, and he sells toys to kids on the street. In another show, I'm playing the Tanzmeister, which means the dancing master. We all know that's not true, but I get to play this very specific role. And then we go into, and I'm also going to be a witch next season in Hansel and Gretel as well. And so I think a lot of the other roles have it a little bit more difficult keeping the enthusiasm. Because for me, I always get to, the director always has usually very specific characteristics and a very specific role that they want to make it. And so for me, I get a lot of variation.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get to the round table here. This is kind of an open-ended thing. This first question, Cecilia, you kind of touched on it a little bit. But what do you guys think are some of the most important skills as an artist to have? We talked about, just knowing that it's just going to be a lot of hard work, and taking the work as it comes, and then just realizing that with many things in life, quick success usually isn't lasting. You got to just keep plowing ahead and plowing ahead. So either go for it.
I mean, I don't want to keep saying the same thing, but I think tenacity is for sure number one. You have to be anxious, you have to be determined, and you have to at least know
Gritty.
Gritty. That's a great word. You have to know at least an idea of what you're going for, and be okay knowing that you're going to fail along the way. You understand. I see this goal. Maybe it's 3 or 4 years away. I mean, in my situation, it took me 2 years to find a job and lots of money. You know that you're trying to earn to throw at getting into a job. But you just have to be aware that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and just keep taking the steps towards that. To be very specific, if I'm going to talk about a singer trying to get into opera, I would say languages and piano, because the more languages you learn, it's going to open up more doors, specifically for somebody like me. As this spiel tenor, it's usually that I'm cast in many operettas, and operettas have dialogue on stage. You do full scenes of dialogue, like musicals. And luckily now my German has gotten good enough where I can do these scenes on stage, and I know what I'm saying and what the other people are saying, and you can really act it and speak it as if you were almost German. As I try and move my career forward, one of my pitfalls will be the next language, because if I go to Italy or to France or to the Czech Republic, wherever, they're going to want me to be able to speak dialogue on stage. And it's going to make it very tough in my journey, so I've got to plan maybe the next language I want to try to start getting okay at. And piano is just the most practical thing in the world. You need to learn, know what's going on in the music. And I started very late. I took my first piano lesson. I was already 18 years old. So learn some piano so you don't have to suffer.
I think just generally as an artist, it still is like working with people. So it's a very big thing that you're easy to get along with, because people, it's like hard work. We work a lot together. It's like very intense. And it's much more fun to do it with someone who's a nice person to work with.
So don't be a jerk is your advice for everybody, is what you're saying.
Well, if you are a jerk, like, they will tell. I promise you will tell. So, you have to be a good person.
Yeah, but I mean, also in the same time, take care of having a good time with people. Enjoy the people you meet, and then you will be a more enjoyable person yourself. So make a career as well. It's like don't just think of where do I want to go the whole time. Just like also enjoy the ride. At the same time you're riding it with.
Well, we didn't even mention that we're doing this interview in Helsinki right now.
Oh yeah, that's true.
I mean, Cecilia is from Helsinki, but we met in Germany at a random party for musicians, and just about things and how we like to interact and what we want to work on, and just became really good friends really quickly. And I had an amazing opportunity just to come up here and spend and celebrate her birthday.
Yes.
So
well, happy birthday, or belated, wherever we're at in the continuum on that.
But that's perfect, because now I've met more musicians here in Helsinki. She's met more musicians in Germany because she got to travel, and we're making these networks of people that we work with in the future, but also celebrate birthdays in the future.
Yeah, totally.
Amazing when you're a musician yourself, and I have a birthday party, then I have this jazz pianist playing, and Matt was singing, and it was like, it's luxurious.
Yeah.
A really nice way to spend time together.
Yeah, of course. And I really think that musicians and artists, while we do often get the rap of being the weird and crazy people, sometimes that's actually a good thing, because we're also a lot of fun. And I think that there's some things that only other artists can get and understand about, like, of course, what we do, obviously, but maybe like certain personality traits and stuff like that. So I've always enjoyed being around most artists. I'm not necessarily everyone's cup of tea. Likewise, I found some people like, I'll hang out with you while we're in the show and I'll be cordial, but outside, I don't think that's going to happen. kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, all right, last question. What are some of your favorite moments on stage, or any embarrassing and funny moments?
Have you been on stage?
Well, not so much, but I count my productions on stage.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
That
works too.
Well, I think some of the fun moments have been when for example, my last children opera was put up. It was called The Silly King. It's about this king who is very, we could say, he's not very immigration friendly. He doesn't like to have these people immigrating, and but in the end, he gets really lonely, and then he gets kind of friends with the immigrants because they're the only people who can stand him.
Yeah.
But very fun production with like amateur singers and a children choir and the young musicians. Like they were all under 18. Like it was very nice to see what a big impact this production had on them. Like, and in their free time, they would also all the time sing the songs, and there was like this made up language that they would always like for fun to speak this make up that language from the opera. And one kid who was in the dancing, doing some dancing and in the choir, he had like a fever. He like said to mom like, "No, I don't really want to go to rehearsals today." And the mom had to like force him to stay home so he wouldn't make the whole. But like that, this is such a big and important part for them, and they were like super sad when it ended after 7 shows. So this was still like over 1,500 people who saw the show, so it was very well attended in total.
What language was your show in?
This was in Swedish, and then the made-up languages. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
How about you, Matt?
I think in general, always the most fun times on stage is when something goes completely wrong. I have to figure it out. Here's a little encouragement for people who are just starting. My very first opera that I ever performed in I was 19. I was 20, something like that. It was my freshman or sophomore year in college. I think my sophomore year, we did La Pericole and Paquillo. Paquillo, who was this, the main tenor part, who's this, traveling troubadour with his wife or girlfriend. And so, it's a 3-act opera. There's a lot to sing. I had no idea what I got myself into when I said I would do it, but teachers thought I could. And I remember I was in the 3rd act, almost at the end. And really funny, it was this big comedic part where I was attached to this really oversized ball and chain, where I could literally pick up.
Okay.
And so imagine just trying to do that. And so at one point of my final aria, there's like 2 verses, I think. I had put the ball and chain down. I'm down on my knees in the middle of the stage. And we get to the 2nd verse, and I just forget what it is. And the playing, and in my mind, you think it's like a year going by, but it's maybe 10 seconds, and I completely forget what the next word's supposed to be. And I'll always remember this moment. The conductor was so kind. He just looked at me and spoke very loudly and said, "Would you like to sing now?"
That's nice.
If you would like to sing, your word is, and he made it really inviting and more comfortable to come back into the scene. He told me, he was calling out to the orchestra, "We're going back to this bar," and he gave me my first word, but he made me almost laugh to say, "Everything's okay, just we'll get through this together." And I mean, that's what's magical about opera, and really about performing in general, especially live performance, is you have to do it together, and it's a complete team effort. And when it works, it's an experience like nothing else. Really, it's something. It's magical and intimate, and it's a moment in time that you just can't forget. I mean, this was now 12 years ago, but it's like in my mind, this happened yesterday.
Yeah, it's so amazing how your mind, I don't know if you have this very often, but I've had those moments where like, I don't know what's going to come out of my mouth. I know I'm supposed to sing in half a bar, and somehow it comes out. Well, I have kind of a similar, actually a recent experience kind of like that, that you were talking about. So For those of you who don't know, when I was in Seattle, I was doing this recital called "Love in the Time of Tinder." So it's all based on dating and it's stand-up comedy and all this stuff. And so there were some arias that I did that they're not my voice type, but I got them transposed. One of them was una furtiva. So
It's
yeah,
definitely not.
yeah, I put it down like a fourth. So it'll work.
It'll
So
work. Yeah.
I'm like, okay, this is such an iconic aria. I really shouldn't screw this up. And I had two performances where I was actually getting it videotaped so I could use it for promotional stuff for managers. And the first time I go through, and it was like I was having a stroke in Italian because I forgot the words halfway through the first verse. Like, not even remotely close to Italian. So then I was like, okay, whatever, just get through it. Nailed the cadenza that I wanted to do. Fine. We'll get it next time. So then the next time comes around, and this time it was in a different spot, less strokey, but it sounded like I just was making up Italian as I went. So then the next I had one more performance of that before I left Seattle, and so I was just like, nope, we're not going to do that. We'll pull out something from the old file that's actually in my brain that's lesser known. So it was a Reynaldo Hahn art song. But it's just, the brain is amazing, but also terrifying on stage at the same time. So
I words more than I would like to admit.
yeah.
Really. And it always seems to come back around, but even songs I've done 1,000 times, sometimes it just doesn't come out the way you want it to.
Yeah.
You're like, that was almost German, maybe sounded Swedish.
It's one of those languages in the continent that I'm on. So
it really is what makes this great, is that it's a challenge. You never know what's going to happen, and when you mess up, it's okay. The next performance is around the corner. You'll be fine. Just keep going.
Yep, totally.